I wanted to start with a story that's from a pretty popular book. Some of you may know it as soon as I start telling it, but it's a bit of a joke, and it was just perfect to start with the topic of this reading, Self-Effort Too is Needed. And so the story is that there's an old Italian joke about a man who has spent his entire life toiling and working and laboring to take care of his family, really to no avail, that over and over again he's always just constantly struggling and the family's impoverished. And so every day on his way home from work, he makes a small pilgrimage to a church, and he kneels before a statue of Mother Mary. And he says, Santa Maria, por favore, please, please let me win the lottery. Day after day after day, he kneels before this statue. Days go by, weeks go by, months go by, years go by, and every day, with steadfast determination, with all that devotion, he kneels before the statue, praying and begging for this divine blessing, for this grace to descend and for him to win the lottery. Finally, years into his daily pilgrimage, he stands before, I can see some of you smiling, you know what's coming. He stands before the statue and he says, por favore, Santa Maria, please, please, please. And the statue comes to life exasperated. And she looks down and she says, my son, please, please, please buy a ticket. And it's just perfect for the topic today. Self-effort too is needed. That divine grace that's flowing down to us, that's constantly, I think it's from the Divine Romance. I couldn't find the exact essay, but Yogananda has a beautiful quote that says, the winds of divine grace are constantly flowing, and we must raise our sails through our own self-effort. And it's just exactly right that for each one of us, we have to explore what that means, what that looks like. This is a path. One of the things that I've always appreciated since coming onto this path a little over a decade ago was that at every level, in the path of self-realization and in the practice of Kriya, it takes dynamic energy, willingness, concentrated effort. No matter what it is that we're doing, we never get a break, which can feel a little exhausting at some points. But really, when you step onto the path of self-realization, you're making a contract with the divine to say, I give you everything. That's why what came to me in that prayer when we were starting today, help us to have the courage and grace to leave nothing behind, to give it all, to surrender everything. And that's a path that takes a lot of devotion, a lot of energy, a lot of willpower and effort, as I was saying, to really meet that qualification. And of course, that self-effort comes through on so many different levels. Just yesterday, we had a kirtan here with Acharya Mangalananda, who's a direct disciple of Ananda Ma. And once a year, we get the benefit of him. He comes with a band of really beautifully well-attuned, not only to their path, but to each other, musicians, and skillful musicians. So they had a kirtan, or we had a kirtan here last night. And I was struck by the exchange or the relationship that it takes in kirtan. If you're just sitting back and enjoying the kirtan, if you're not singing along, chanting along, giving your energy into the kirtan, it deflates just a little bit. But when we're all there was one chant that we were chanting, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, and people were up and they were dancing around the room. And everybody was involved and engaged, and you could feel that divine balloon being buoyed up, each of us buoyed up on that divine balloon, because there's an active engagement, there's a participation. Our effort, our willingness, our commitment to give our energy into that practice was present for each one of us. We had a lot of different things happening yesterday. The other thing that we had was a wonderful lavender fest out at Ananda Valley Farm, and over 100 people came through to enjoy all the different activities and be a part of the lavender. And even out there, I was thinking, I haven't been out to the farm in a few weeks. I've been away for the last couple of weeks, and I was just struck by how neat and tidy and beautiful and bountiful the flower gardens were, which I'm sure they were cleaned up in preparation for yesterday's event, but also just how much effort and willingness goes into the exchange of growing a garden, that if our wonderful gardeners and all the volunteers just sort of left it to God's will, it probably would grow a little bit. There'd be, some joy and some bountiful flowers there. But what they do, the effort, the willingness to tend the garden, that's that great joke. I won't tell it. We all know. But where there's a farmer and, someone comes to the farmer and says, oh, no, now I'm not going to remember it. This is why you have to prepare your jokes. But the end of it was something like, well, look at what God has given you. And the joke is, yeah, you should have seen what he did with it when it was all his, right? That idea that we have to give our effort and our energy into it. And that self-effort comes, as I was saying, on so many different levels. To bring it into the story, I love this story, the miraculous healing of the woman who's had this hemorrhage for over 12 years. And the power of this particular moment and the words that Jesus says in response to her. And if we just take a step back and scale back into the story, the context that we don't have in the reading from this morning, which most of us will know, of course, is that with this particular ailment that she was struggling with for so many years, she would have been outcasted from her community. She would have been considered unclean. She wouldn't have even been allowed to go into the temple grounds, let alone to come to the Son of God and kneel at his feet and touch the hem of his robe. And so there is all this context around what, for her, that impurity, that uncleanness, but how that translates allegorically, what it can look like for each one of us. That uncleanness, that part of us that sometimes feels unworthy, undeserving of God's love, that keeps us from reaching out with all of our effort and energy and kneeling before the divine, whether it's the statue that we actually go and buy the lottery ticket for, or just touching one single thread on the robe of the Son of God. But what is it that actually healed her? Because all of that reality existed. All of the world was telling her all the ways that she was undeserving. And of course, what Jesus says to her is, it is by your faith that you are healed. It was the inner communion with the divine consciousness, the divine power, the knowing that she held within her own heart, that divine power was not only coursing through Jesus, but was also within her, that created that miraculous healing. And so the self-effort that we put in on our own path, whatever it may be, coming to a kirtan and chanting, doing our morning sadhana practices, serving in whatever ways we serve, practicing kindness and devotion and open-heartedness with our peers and with our loved ones, whatever those acts of self-effort are, each one of them is bringing us closer and closer into alignment with that consciousness of inner communion. And it is in those moments that we have the faith to receive God's grace. And there is that balance. I was just thinking about a story that a few of us, we were having dinner on Friday evening, Shantala and Aaron and I, and Shantala was reminding us of a story that Davy told. I can't remember if it was here or if it was up at Spiritual Renewal Week, but this idea that when we come before the divine, if we're harboring or holding on to those parts of ourselves that are keeping us just distant, that are just feeling slightly unworthy, that are just causing us to hold back and restrict just a little bit, that when we have all of that collection, what we have to begin to do is just be able to put it aside and to realize that Divine Mother is just reaching down and sees us in our most pure state. This is the second part of that reading, this beautiful quote, one of the best, or in my opinion, one of my favorite quotes from the Bhagavad Gita. Cling to me, and I will make good your deficiencies and permanent your gains. This is the promise that Divine Mother, that Krishna gives to us in the Bhagavad Gita. It's ours already. You already possess within you. This is Yogananda's definition of self-realization. The knowing in body, mind, and spirit that you are now in possession of the kingdom of heaven, that you need not pray that it come to you, that God's omnipresence is your omnipresence. And the self-effort part, all we need to do is improve our knowing. And so for each one of us to hold that reality, to ask that question of ourselves, what is it that keeps us from reaching out in pure faith for the hem of Jesus' garment? What is it that holds us back? And to come back to that point, the story that Shantala was reminding us of when we were talking about this reading on Friday night. Devi was very early on the path at Ananda, and she was asked to go up to Swami Kriyananda's house and deliver something. I think that's how all of this started. She was asked to deliver the mail, and she was feeling very humble and kind of honored and a little bit undeserving of the opportunity to go up and just even have those few moments of satsang with Swamiji. But timidly, she went up and walked up and put the mail down and sort of thought she got away with it and was kind of sneaking out of the house. And Swamiji said, "Oh, Devi, is that you?" And she said, "Yes, sir." And she comes in, and he says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're here." He was working on a writing project. And he said, "I would love a cup of coffee. Could you make me a cup of coffee?" And Devi says, "Yes, of course, Swamiji." And she goes into the kitchen, and she realizes she's never made a cup of coffee before, and she really has no idea what to do. And so she's having a little bit of a moment of panic, and she's sort of standing in the kitchen, poised. She didn't say this, but I can imagine just poised. What do I do? Do I run? Do I cry? What happens next? And so she realizes that the first thing she knows is you have to boil water. So she starts, and she pours a pot full of water, and she puts it on the stove. And as many of us know, maybe all too well, if you leave a pot of water boiling too long, the water begins to dissipate, and there's nothing left at the end. So she got stuck after step one, wasn't really sure what to do after that, and the water's going down and going down and going down. And it's been, the way she tells the story, it's been probably 20, 25 minutes at this point, much longer than it should have been to make a cup of coffee. So Swamiji walks into the kitchen, and he looks at Devi, kind of panicked, and he looks at this pot of water that's almost empty, and he just bursts out laughing and embraces her in this great hug, and then they make a pot of coffee together. And it's such a sweet story because she was feeling so overwhelmed, unworthy, timid, all of these different emotions that each one of us carry, whatever they are. I'm using those generic terms because we could get specific for each one of us. We're all carrying our own backpack full of those past habits, those self-doubts, those foibles that we carry with us. And, it would be so easy to just take the backpack off and walk away, but somehow it tends to always, you find that you've put it on again with the next scenario or the next situation that comes to us. But then in that moment, to break through all of that, here she was feeling so afraid. What is Swami going to do? Is he going to scold me? Is he going to laugh at me? Is he going to make me feel worse than I do in my own head? And just like a divine mother, he just laughs joyfully with her, embraces her in a hug, and they move on. Because you have everything that you need already. You are already perfect in the eyes of the divine. And so that question of the self-effort comes back to us to say, we all know the math equation that Yogananda has given us, that the spiritual path is 25% the effort of the guru, 25% the effort of the devotee, 25% the support and help of the guru, and 50% the grace of God. So it looks pretty good from the outside, and we can sit back and say, I'm only responsible for 25%. But what does Master say to us? Of course, Yogananda says that 25% is 100% of our willing effort and joyful cooperation. That everything that we do can be oriented toward that question, just like this woman who touches just the very hem of Jesus' robe and is healed by her own faith. That everything we do in our life, there is no separation. It can bring us closer to that divine knowing, to that divine consciousness. It's instantaneous. One other story that came to mind, actually Mangalananda shared this last night. For those of you that were here, you get to hear it again. This was a story that Anandamoy Ma told him and some of the other devotees, that there was a woman and she was very pious and she was very devout, and her husband was an atheist and just wanted nothing to do with spirituality in any way. And his wife was imploring him, just say the name of Rama and Sita. Just say the name of Rama and Sita. And he would say, no, I will not say the name of Rama and Sita. He says, no, I won't say it. I won't say it. Then she brings him to her guru, and she implores her guru, please help him to encourage him to say the name of Rama and Sita. And he says, no, no. And he finally, in defiance, calls out, stomps his foot, and he says, no, I will never say the name Rama and Sita. And in that moment, what Nanda Ma says is that Divine Mother took him on as a guru in that moment, because simply the calling out, the soul's call that awakens that spark of inspiration that is within us, is enough to draw that divine grace to us. Now, was it sustained? Probably not without his self-effort. But of course, there's story after story after story of that in the AY. I was just in seclusion for the last 2 weeks and had the privilege of listening to the AY again as I was out on walks and runs and such. And there were a few different stories that came to mind. I'm telling you, this is just a story. It's just storytelling today. There were too many wonderful things I couldn't pick. But 2 different stories that came to mind from the AY. You know, the life of Lahiri Mahashaya is actually very similar to the life of Christ in a lot of ways. And there are 2 miraculous healings that happen, many miraculous healings, but 2 in particular that stood out to me today as I was tuning into this reading. And the first one happens very early on in the text, and Lahiri Mahashaya has a devotee who is blind, and one of his fellow devotees encourages him. He says, we know our master is omnipresent. We know that our master can heal and has healed, performed miraculous healings. Why don't you ask him to heal your sight? And he's a little bit bashful, but eventually decides to go, and he kneels before Lahiri Mahashaya, and he says, Master, if it be your will, could you heal my eyes, and could you heal me? And Lahiri Mahashaya sort of scoldingly looks down at him, and he says to his devotee, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, and he says, you know this body is just a bag of bones. This body has no power to heal you. And he says, no, sir, but the divine prana, the divine life force that is coursing through you has the power to heal. And in that moment he says, and so be it, you are right, it is the divine power coursing through me that can heal you. And so again, just like in this story, as the woman touches the edge of the robe, the more that we can believe, that we can tune into, and we can feel how close we are just behind that veil of the delusion that's pulling us back, that's telling us all the reasons that we are not worthy to grasp at the hem of Jesus' robe, the more that we can fight that through our own willingness, through our own self-effort, through everything that we're doing over and over and over again, bringing ourselves back to that place of knowing. This is what the Festival of Light says to us. Into your hands have been delivered the sacred keys of awakening. Abundant now is your hope. So for each one of us, we have that power to claim it as our own. And this is why, to come back to it exactly or where I started earlier today, one of the things that drew me to this path when I first found Ananda a little over a decade ago was that dynamic energy that's involved in everything that we are doing. Again, that you never quite get to be let off the hook. You can take an afternoon off, you can go watch Netflix for a little while, but you better get right back in there, and you better get right back on that path and keep walking toward the goal, because each one of us knows the goal. We've tasted it. We know that it is there. We've experienced it in big ways and little ways, and once we've had that experience, there is no turning back. And so what else would we do but leap off with full faith, giving everything that we have to be refining our consciousness, to do more and better every single moment of our lives. You know, I'll leave us with just one quote from Sister Gyanamata. In one of the letters that she writes to a fellow disciple, she says, she's talking about prayer, and it's so beautiful. She says, pray ceaselessly, pray constantly, until you cease to pray at all. And that's what I would say to each one of us. Practice self-effort, practice willing participation, practice determination, practice discipline over and over again until you cease to practice, because it simply exudes from you, and that divine consciousness is laid out in front of you, and you can grasp it and feel it and share it with all. God bless you.
Let's have a moment of silence.
John, renouncing all, left his home, wrapped in solitude, far from men's ways, roaming across desert sands, seeking God's truth. Long years he spoke only with God, till silent of soul, wisdom did fill the ache of his heart. Then he did see